Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So inshallah in today's session we're going to pick up on Surah Abasa wa Tawalla. So Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. As-salatu was-salamu ala Rasulil Kareem. Alhamdulillahi wa kafa wa salamun ala ibadihi alladhina istafa amma ba'd. Fa'a'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Abasa wa Tawalla an ja'ahu al-a'ma. وما يدريك لعله يزكى أو يذكر فتنفعه الذكرى أما من استغنى فأنت له تصدى وما عليك ألا يزكى وأما من جاءك يسعى وهو يخشى فأنت عنه تلهى كلا إنها تذكرة فمن شاء ذكره في صحف مكرمة مرفوعة مطهرة بأيدي سفرة كرام بررة سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد وبارك وسلم اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد وبارك وسلم اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد وبارك وسلم. So Surah Abasa is the third surah in the Juz Amma, and it is 42 verses long, and this is considered to be a Makki surah. So the background of this surah was that an incident happened in Mecca at the time, in the initial time of Islam. So here basically, at this point in time, the Prophet ﷺ was giving dawah to people and inviting people to Islam, and not many people had accepted his message at that time. And those who had accepted were generally from amongst the poor and the weak people. So it just so happened that the Prophet ﷺ was able to actually gather the tribal chiefs of the various tribes in Mecca and was able to have an opportunity to present Islam to them and preach to them about the deen. So just to give you an idea of who these were, so some of the people were Utbah, the son of Abu Lahab, Umayyah bin Khalaf, Abu Jahl, and Abbas, the uncle of the Prophet ﷺ, who wasn't Muslim at that time. And another name that's been mentioned is Walid bin Mughira. These were big leaders in the community. They had a lot of influence, and the possibility was that if they accepted the message of Islam, then they could actually invite many others into Islam. The whole tribes would follow them, and obviously this was a major sort of a turning point, if that was to get them together and to actually give dawah to them. And they wouldn't normally give their time to listen to things like this, but here, Alhamdulillah, Prophet ﷺ was to actually get an audience with them, and this was a perfect opportunity to actually present the message of Islam. So now, if you imagine the situation, Prophet ﷺ has this opportunity, and they were actually willing to listen to what he was going to say. So Prophet ﷺ was very happy that they're actually going to listen, and if they actually embrace Islam, then this is going to benefit us, as many people will come into Islam through them, and this will also be a face off against the oppressors who are trying to stamp out the light of Islam at that time, because now if you've got more people behind you, then there's more strength behind you in that sense. So there was benefit in preaching to them in terms of what the Prophet ﷺ felt was going to be beneficial. Then, so with that image in one side, where you've got the leaders, the cream of the society in front of the Prophet ﷺ on one hand, then you have a Sahabi that comes along. Now this Sahabi was called Abdullah bin Shur'i radiallahu anhu, or also more famously known as Abdullah bin Maktoum. The son of the mother of the blind one. So he was blind. And he had actually already embraced Islam, so he was a Sahabi at this point, and he wanted to ask the Prophet ﷺ a question. So you can imagine he's blind, he's trying to actually find his way around to see where the Prophet ﷺ is, and he's basically then eventually reaches the Prophet ﷺ. Now being blind, of course he can't see what's going on. So he doesn't know what the Prophet ﷺ is actually doing, or indeed who is in front of the Prophet ﷺ. Yani, he can't see all these leaders of the Quraysh or the tribes all sat there. So he actually goes up to the Prophet ﷺ and then sort of straight away asks him, Alimni ma amalaka Allah. Teach me what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has taught you. In other words, he wanted to learn from the Prophet ﷺ. He wanted to learn deen. He wanted to better himself, and he wanted to learn, obviously what Allah ta'ala has revealed. Now, the Prophet ﷺ didn't respond to his initial question, because at this point in time he was deep in a conversation with the hotshots of Makkah, so to speak. So now the Sahabi asks the question again, and again the Prophet ﷺ doesn't respond. So now he asks a third time, and this time the Prophet ﷺ's facial expression changed, because he was being disturbed. And obviously you can imagine, if you're deep in a conversation with some key individuals, then if somebody comes out of nowhere and just asks you a question that could easily be asked later on, then that might make you a bit annoyed or a bit frustrated. So this was perfectly kind of natural in that sense. But because he was being disturbed now, he kind of made a facial expression, or his face had changed. So he didn't say anything. Obviously the Prophet ﷺ, being who he was, he didn't want to hurt anybody or make anybody upset. So he didn't say anything. He just made this expression. And at the same time, Abdullah ibn Maktoum, the Sahabi, he couldn't see anything either. So he didn't know what was going on. Now, this is really interesting, because this was the cause, this incident there, the asking of the question to the Prophet ﷺ a few times, and then the reaction of the Prophet ﷺ, is what actually caused the initial ayats of this surah to be revealed. So Allah Ta'ala loved this Sahabi very much because of the talab he showed, the yearning that he showed, the desire to come and seek and better himself in terms of his deen. Allah Ta'ala loved that. So when someone has talab, has this desire and yearning, this is something that Allah Ta'ala likes. So obviously he sees this, Allah Ta'ala sees this in this Sahabi, and so he decided to then do the tarbiyah, the correction of the Prophet ﷺ right there and then, and these ayat then came down. So what is essentially Allah Ta'ala is telling the Prophet ﷺ is that the one who comes seeking knowledge is the one that should get the most priority from you. So because this Sahabi was already a Muslim and he wanted to improve himself in deen, he should have been given the priority rather than the cream of the crop of the Makkans and stuff, who weren't really that interested. They were just kind of sitting there to give audience to the Prophet ﷺ, but they didn't come there to actually embrace Islam or anything. They were just there to just hear out what the Prophet ﷺ wanted to say. Now, the first few ayat that I read up to verse number 10, these ayats actually were quite scary for the Prophet ﷺ, because they are directly rebuking the Prophet ﷺ, if we use that phrase. And then the verse 11 comes along, and then Allah Ta'ala kind of puts some sakina back in the heart of the Prophet ﷺ through the words that he's used in this ayat. So we're going to go through this inshallah. So for the first 16 ayats of this surah, this is all about related to this specific incident. Now, ulama say that why was Allah Ta'ala correcting the Prophet ﷺ? And why was he given this tarbiyah, this correction straight away? And just over the fact that a blind man come to ask a question and not the leaders. Why was it wrong that he didn't address him? Now, if you look at it from the side of the Prophet ﷺ, he wasn't wrong either, because he was actually, in his mind, was that I've got an opportunity here to address some key figures in the community who, if they do embrace Islam, then this is going to have massive benefit to us. Whereas the Sahabi that come to ask questions, I could catch up with him later on and I can speak to him later on, etc. So that wasn't seemed as that critical. So there's a number of points that have been mentioned here by the ulama, which I'll just try and briefly mention just for our benefit. So the first is that the principle of our deen is that the majority benefit is better than one individual person benefiting. So if there's 20 people that can benefit by taking some advice and giving some nasiha to them, it's better to benefit those than, on the other hand, if you only have one person. So obviously this was one aspect to it. The answer from the other side of it is, we look at it from the Allah Ta'ala's perspective, is that certain benefit, guaranteed benefit, is going to be better than uncertain benefit. Now, this Sahabi, the blind Sahabi, Abdullah ibn Mukhtum radhiyallahu anhu, he was already Muslim, and he wanted to actually benefit himself by learning some deen. So this was going to be a certain benefit. Whereas the leaders, they didn't have any sincerity, and possibly they were wasting just the time of the Prophet ﷺ, because they had no real intention to learn. So it was uncertain that even if they would accept Islam, let alone benefit many people. Another point that's been mentioned is that accepting Islam is better than just learning about Islam, because learning is going to raise a person in their rank, but accepting will actually take you out of hellfire, essentially, because you're no longer in the state of kufr. So it is more important to accept Islam than to just simply learn. And this is one of the points that's been mentioned, is that this is why we have different groups even in our own deen. So if you look around in the different groups within the Muslim community, you have some that go out and do dawah. There are others who go out and do tabligh. They go invite others, remind the other Muslims about Islam and everything. And then you have some that are the mashayikh, who basically work on the hearts of other people. They give them spiritual benefit, spiritual development, tazkiyah, and these type of things. And essentially they're all working for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They're all working with the same goal, that bringing people closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but in different ways, obviously. Now Allah ta'ala is basically taking the side of tazkiyah here, because you can have 100 Muslims, but if they're all sinful and committing sins, etc., then it's not going to benefit anybody. The community is not going to benefit if everybody is extremely sinful. Whereas on the other hand, if you have Muslims who have clean, purified hearts, this is going to benefit the community much, much more than just having people with the title of being Muslim but nothing else that goes with it. In fact, there is a hadith in which the Prophet ﷺ mentions words to the effect that one scholar, an alim, is more stronger upon shaitan than 1,000 worshippers. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is teaching that ilm and tazkiyah are more important, and you have to work on quality, not quantity. So this was essentially the kind of crunch message that was being conveyed to these ayat. Now, the Mashaykh have given us kind of an analogy that we can kind of learn from in this context. So what they've said is that, you can have a dawah group, that go and talk to non-Muslims and teach them Islam, which is very good. Then you'd have a second group that is the bleak group, if you want to call it that teach Muslims about their basics of their deen, the fundamentals. And then you have a third group, which is the tazkiyah group, which is basically focusing on the spiritual development of a person. So one kind of analogy that's been given is, you have a person that cuts wood to make furniture. So this is like the equivalent of their dawah sort of group. Then you have this wood that's then been given to take shape make into a piece of furniture or something. This is the second group that's actually teaching the fundamentals. And then you need somebody who's going to actually polish this wood to make it into some fine furniture. In other words, beautify it, adorn it, decorate it, etc. So this is the third person, who is the group that's tazkiyah. So this is like the analogy from that perspective. Now, if the furniture, if you imagine, is not polished and beautified, who's going to buy it? The reality is nobody. If it doesn't look nice and it's not done up well, then no one's going to be interested. Obviously when you buy something that's made out of wood, it's got to be polished, it's got to be sanded, all the blemishes need to be taken out, all the faults need to be removed, it's got to be varnished and upholstered to look really nice. This is the element of tazkiyah. This is what it does. So it gives you that final polishing and kind of essentially from a human perspective, it beautifies the person's character if it's done properly. But we all need all three groups though. So you need somebody who's going to gather the wood, and then you're going to have somebody who's going to teach the fundamentals, and then you're going to have essentially the person who does the tazkiyah. Now, if there's no wood there, then how is anyone going to polish and make anything out of it? So of course, all elements are needed, but there's just different groupings that we have, and this is the way the structure works. And it works as a team in a sense. So people do need to go out there. We need to give dawah. We need to bring Muslims, onto the deen, and then non-Muslims as well. And then people need to work at bringing, the faraid into people so that they understand their basics. And then you need the third group, which is the mashayikh, who need to then actually polish up and clean people's character and remove the diseases of the heart from them. Now, our deen in reality has three dimensions, and oftentimes we don't really hear about it or understand it well. So you have the Islam aspect, Iman aspect, and Ihsan aspect, and all three have to be there for a person to really be, that complete sort of human being, from that perspective. Obviously, this is a massive topic, so I'm not going to dwell into this piece of it. Inshallah, if Allah gives tawfiq, then we'll cover that at a future point. Then the third point that the Mashaykh have mentioned is that from the etiquette side of things, Prophet ﷺ was teaching that it's rude to interrupt. So if you can imagine here, Prophet ﷺ was, in the heat of giving his dawah, etc., and then all of a sudden he gets interrupted, albeit by a blind Sahabi who couldn't actually see what was going on. Now, Allah's point is that, this person, because he's blind, he has an excuse. He doesn't know. How does he know that dawah is going on to an elite group of people in the community? So you can't really teach somebody who has an uzr, an excuse. So, he can't see what's going on. Now, another point that's mentioned is that the Prophet ﷺ changed his expression. Now, one of the things that the ulama write is that perhaps he changed his expression because he knew that the person is blind and he won't be able to see it, and therefore he's not going to be offended. That's a possible explanation. Now, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's message was that the life of the Prophet ﷺ is an example for us. He sent a person with a great character. So that means that he has to be a role model for everybody. So in other words, what Allah Ta'ala is saying is that you shouldn't have made that expression even if the person is blind. It doesn't matter. You shouldn't be in a situation where you're showing your irritation on somebody because this is beyond your status. You're above this. You're a prophet, so there's a higher station to work at. So even when you look at it from this perspective, even from the Prophet ﷺ's side, there was justification for everything that he did. And this is why sometimes, we might see our teachers or leaders in the community maybe doing something, and we may not necessarily fully comprehend it, down to the fact that we don't really know exactly what's going on, or maybe we don't have that understanding of Sharia. Maybe they're doing something that Sharia has given them ijazah to do, but outwardly we can't see that, or we don't see that, and we might have a misconception. So we just need to be obviously mindful for ourselves that we're taking things in the right context. So now here basically we'll go through a few of the verses inshallah ta'ala, and then so the first verse basically Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says Abasa wa tawalla, which basically means he changed his expression and turned away. So Abasa basically means to change a facial expression. Literally, in Arabic, it means to frown. But ulama say that out of adab, we don't say that the Prophet ﷺ is frowning. In other words, we don't really say negative words attributed to the Prophet ﷺ. Then, the next verse, we say, it's anja'ahul a'ma, that because the blind came to him, yani the Sahabi Abdullah ibn Maktoum came to the Prophet ﷺ. So now you can imagine how the Prophet ﷺ might be feeling when these ayat are being revealed, that all of a sudden, Allah Ta'ala is actually addressing him directly and telling him his actions that he's done. So obviously that naturally would scare somebody that, oh my God, I'm being held to account here. So if you look at the wording just from an Arabic perspective, for those who study Arabic grammar, you'll notice that the sigha, or the verb tense, if you like, is being used as he, and it's not you. It's being told in the third person sense. But then in the next few verses, you'll see that the verb changes to directly to you, i.e. to the Prophet ﷺ. So verse number 3, Allah Ta'ala says, وَمَا يُدْرِيكَ لَعَلَّهُ Zakka. Basically means, and what could make you know, hopefully, he would have achieved purity. Meaning, O Prophet ﷺ, how do you know that he could have attained the purification he was looking for by talking to you, getting advice from you, etc. Then Allah Ta'ala mentions, O yazakkaru fatanfa'ahu dhikra, or would take advice and the advice would have benefited him. In other words, that at least the least benefit he would have gotten is that he would have taken some advice from you, and that would have been enough to benefit him for what he needed. Amma man istaghna. So as for the one who is free of need, meaning he does not care or is careless, and this is referring to the audience that was listening to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. In the next verse, Allah Ta'ala says, فَأَنْتَ لَهُ تَصَدَّى, that you are going after him. Allah Ta'ala doesn't show them as a group. He says you're going after him. Each one of them, you're making an effort to go after them, and they don't really care. In other words, وَمَا عَلَيْكَ أَلَّا يَزَّكَّى, that it is not on you that he does not purify. That you're not responsible for those, the guys you're giving dawah to. If they don't accept Islam, that's not your responsibility. Your job is to go out there and present the deen. Guidance and giving guidance is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So if they don't accept it, that's no onus on you regarding that. And then we'll just do one more verse and then we'll wrap up inshallah for today. So then the next one says, Allah Ta'ala says, وَأَمَّا مَنْ جَاءَكَ يَسْعَى, regarding the one who came to you struggling. Yas'a, he struggled. He came to you with talab, with desire, with seeking to learn, and this yearning, expecting and hoping for something so eagerly. The Sahaba, if you imagine, radiallahu majma'een, they were always eager to learn from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Whatever opportunity would come, they would try and learn something. So now, obviously, you can imagine this Sahabi, he's come to learn and ask something, and he came with a lot of yearning to kind of come and benefit himself. And then on top of that, he was blind. So for him to come and find the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, takes a lot more effort than for somebody who has sight. They can see where they're going and very easily, quickly get to where they need to go. Whereas a blind man has to make a lot of effort in trying to find the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, navigate the streets, and get there. So this is essentially the meaning of this verse here. So inshallah we'll pause it here at verse number 18. Inshallah we'll pick it up tomorrow. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept our coming here together to learn from the verses of the Quran. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala enable us to maximize our time in this blessed month of Ramadan. Requesting everyone for du'as as well, inshallah. Alhamdulillahi wa kafa wa salamun ala ibadihi alladhina istafa amma ba'd. فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. وأما من جاءك يسعى وهو يخشى فأنت عنه تلهى كلا إنها تذكرة فمن شاء ذكره في صحف مكرمة مرفوعة مطهرة بأيدي سفرة كرام بررة قتل الإنسان ما أكفره من أي شيء خلقه من نطفة خلقه فقدره ثم السبيل يسره ثم أماته فأقبره سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد وبارك وسلم. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد وبارك وسلم. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد وبارك وسلم. So inshallah ta'ala we will carry on from where we left off yesterday. So yesterday, if you remember, we started on Surah Abasa, and we were discussing the whole incident where the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was giving da'wah to the kind of elites of Makkah at that time. Whilst he was doing this da'wah, there was a Sahabi called Abdullah ibn Maktoum radiallahu anhu, who was a blind Sahabi, and he wanted to speak to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He had some sort of question or some advice to take from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So he came searching for the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and then basically interrupted the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam while Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was giving da'wah to these elites of Makkah. And then the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam then basically kind of slightly made a facial expression towards Abdullah bin Maktoum radiallahu anhu. So these ayat, the first few ayat that were revealed were regarding this whole incident, and how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then basically does the tarbiyah, the correction of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam with regards to this. So inshallah we got to verse 8, so we'll pick up from verse 9 inshallah ta'ala. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions وَهُوَ يَخْشَى, basically means while he fears. So yani up until this point, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has described, the yearning of the Sahabi that came to ask a question, and even though he was blind, he came struggling because obviously he can't see where he's going, etc. So it was difficult for him to find the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But yet, through all of that, through his yearning and his passion to learn and ask his questions, whatever, he found the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And Allah Ta'ala then mentions while he fears, yani he had that taqwa of Allah in the heart. Then Allah Ta'ala mentions in verse 10, فَأَنْتَ عَنْهُ طَلَحَّا, which basically means that you ignored him. So here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, actually, it's interesting, he describes the attributes of those people of ilm, of knowledge, the student who's seeking knowledge about the deen, that he should come with talab, yani a yearning, a desire to kind of gain understanding, and then he should also have this khashiyah, this fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So there's two ingredients there that we can kind of take from these ayat. So up until here, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, as you can imagine, was quite fearful about these ayat. They were kind of directly addressing the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam in a tone that kind of indicated that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was not happy with the way he had kind of reacted to Abdullah ibn Maktoum, was asking a question. So now the next verse is kind of a soothing verse to kind of calm the Prophet ﷺ down after the initial ayat were revealed. So in verse 11, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions Kalla innaha tazkira, that nay, this is indeed an advice. So in other words, what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying here is, I'm not angry with you, don't worry, I'm just giving you advice. So this surah kind of is known to be kind of heavy on the Prophet ﷺ because it's a kind of a direct approach to him, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is speaking directly to the Prophet ﷺ. But at the end Allah ta'ala is mentioning that, don't worry, this is not anything to worry about. It's just me giving you some advice and tarbiyah on how to kind of better handle the situation. So at this point then the Prophet ﷺ was feeling much more relaxed than previously. Then verse 12, which says, فَمَنْ شَاءَ ذَكَرَ, so whoever wishes, he will remember it, and he will take the advice. So whoever takes, when somebody gives a reminder to somebody else and advises them, some will take it, others will ignore it and not do anything about it. So this is what Allah Ta'ala is kind of saying here, that, give your advice to whoever, but, only some will take it, others will not. So then the question is, what is this reminder then? Where is it? Then Allah Ta'ala says in verse 13 that fi suhufim muqarrama, means that in the noble scripts. Then it says, Allah Ta'ala describes them as marfu'atim mutahhara, raised and pure. So what are these scripts then? This is the question. So there's different opinions that the Mufassirin have put together with regards to which kind of scripts is being referred to. So I'll just run through a few of them just to give you a flavor for what's been said. So the first one is that it refers to the Lawhil Mahfuz, the protected tablet, which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has written everything on. What's going to happen and the destiny of everyone, etc. So this is something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has kept. And no one can reach this except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then opinion 2 is that this refers to the part that the angels are allowed to copy. So Allah Ta'ala tells them to take certain things out, like the books which were taken by Jibreel alayhi salam, and which he relayed to the prophets. Third opinion is that the books it refers to all the books that were sent to the prophets. So Isa alayhi salam, Musa alayhi salam, referring to the Torah, Injil, and Quran. So this message that is in the Quran was essentially also in the previous scriptures in some way, shape or form. And then you have a fourth opinion which suggests that these are the scripts of the Quran that the Sahaba radiallahu anhum used to write down. So if you imagine when the ayats were being revealed to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, there was different scribes that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam had appointed to actually basically write down those ayats and preserve them. And then in a later time, in the time of Uthman, then they were actually compiled into the kind of mushaf that we have today. And then the next verse Allah Ta'ala mentions bi-aidi safara, which basically translates as in the hands of the scribes. So this can be two different, again, opinions on this. So one is that the people of Safir, this is the definition given of Safara. Safir basically means a representative. So this could include the angels, the prophets, the Sahaba, and then the ulama who come after, obviously, the first three generations that we call the righteous generations. So these are all essentially people representing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then they're representing essentially the message of what Allah Ta'ala was trying to convey in the Quran. Then there's another opinion, which is that the Safara relates to a plural of a word called Safir, which is meaning the one who writes. So a Katib here means the one who writes, can be referred to as Kiraman Katibin, the two angels who write, and those Sahaba also who write the Quran. So just depending on which interpretation the Mufassirin take will determine which way they kind of relate that verse. And then verse 16, Allah Ta'ala mentions Kiramin Barara, noble and righteous. So this means that the ones who are representing the deen are good and noble people. So now up to these verses have all come together, all about this incident about Abdullah ibn Mukhtum radiallahu anhu trying to approach the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, etc. So now we're going to kind of move on to a different tangent in the surah. So it moves into a different aspect and a different incident actually. So here now, basically, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam had 4 daughters, and 2 of them were married to the sons of Abu Lahab. So this was going back to before Prophet ﷺ was made a prophet. So those daughters were Kulthum radiallahu anha and Ruqayya radiallahu anha. Now, as we mentioned, Abu Lahab had 2 sons, or he had a number of sons, but these 2 particular sons that were married to the daughters of the Prophet ﷺ, they were Utbah and Utayba. Now, when the Prophet ﷺ received Nubuwwat and started preaching Islam to people, one of the staunchest enemies that he came across was this character called Abu Lahab. So he was really an ardent enemy of Islam. He couldn't really stand anything that was told to him, etc. So one night, basically, in an effort to try and get retaliation on the Prophet and sort of harm the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he basically ordered his sons to divorce the daughters of the Prophet. And they basically complied with his orders. They went ahead and divorced his daughters. Now, out of the 2 sons, Utbah was the more rebellious one. And so not only did he divorce the daughter of the Prophet ﷺ, he actually came to the Prophet ﷺ and actually held him by his collar and even tried to attack him. Na'udhu billah. And then he actually said words to the effect that, see, I have done this to your daughter. I've divorced her. And if you continue with what you're doing and preaching Islam and everything, then we will try and harm you. We will harm you even more. So this is how kind of horrible as an individual he was. And then when he attacked the Prophet ﷺ, Prophet said to him, may Allah put one of his dogs on you, or words to that effect. Which again, kind of might seem like it was against the nature of the Prophet ﷺ. But what we say is that, we know the merciful nature of the Prophet ﷺ. So in other words, what he was trying to say was, may Allah Ta'ala deal with you, basically. So after this incident finished, Utbah realized that the Prophet ﷺ had made a bad dua for him. And they kind of, although they didn't accept him as a prophet, they kind of knew that he was some sort of prophet. And they knew then, because they knew him from before, they knew how he was, his righteousness, his uprightness, his truthfulness, etc. And they could obviously see that as Islam was spreading slowly, various things were happening, amazing events were happening, and so on and so forth. So now, what happens is that Utbah actually travels on regular journeys to go to the various nearby sort of countries like Sham, Jordan, Syria, etc. And one night so after this incident, he started taking guards with him to protect him. Now one night they were traveling and they rested at a place, and then all of a sudden a lion came out of nowhere and it attacked Utbah and killed him. Now he had others. So Abu Lahab had other sons, one of which was Utayba and Mutib. Both of these actually accepted Islam eventually. Now there's a principle here as well, that those who rejected the Prophet ﷺ did not get tawfiq, or did get tawfiq, sorry. But those who tried to disgrace the Prophet ﷺ, they never got tawfiq. So even though Utayba divorced the daughter of the Prophet ﷺ, he did eventually get tawfiq to enter Islam. However, there were certain individuals that were really staunch against the Prophet ﷺ. They were never even given tawfiq. And in a further surah later on, we may come across this term called the mustahzi'un. So these were the people who used to mock the Prophet ﷺ. And so those guys, the majority of those didn't get tawfiq to enter the deen. Then the next verse, 17, Allah Ta'ala mentions قُتِلَ الْإِنسَانُ مَا أَكْفَرَهُ وَأَكْفَرَهُ. That man was killed, what ungratefulness he showed to him. So death be unto the man, how ungrateful he is. So this is referring to a specific person, in this case Utbah. But in a more general sense, it applies to anybody who kind of is following that person's character and the way he behaved, etc. So Prophet ﷺ, in other words, is giving him guidance, showing him the way, trying to get him to connect with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and follow the deen. And in turn, what does he do? He divorces the daughter of the Prophet ﷺ. Not only that, he then tries to show hostility towards the Prophet ﷺ, so much so that he even tried to attack the Prophet ﷺ. So then, regarding man, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given him so many blessings. So, he was fairly wealthy, his father, Abu Lahab, etc. So they weren't exactly poor. Yet, despite all the blessings that he had, then he's still rejecting what dawah is being given to him. The advice is given to him, the dawah, etc. Now Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is explaining how can someone be so ungrateful. Now in the upcoming verses, Allah ta'ala basically starts to mention and remind man about his reality, his state. So this is now very, very interesting here. So in verse 18, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions, from which stuff did he, Allah, create him? So here basically Allah Ta'ala is reminding us that how is a human being created? Allah Ta'ala creates a human being from a fluid, and that fluid is even considered from a fiqh perspective najas, impure. If it was to come in contact with our clothes, we wouldn't be able to pray. This is according to the Hanafi madhab. And then on top of that, we are being ungrateful. Then in the next verse it mentions, from a drop of semen he created him and designed him in a due proportion. And then Allah Ta'ala mentions in the following verse, then he made the way easy for him. So the way easy, the path here is referring to the womb of the mother. Him coming out of his mother was made easy for him. And then another way of interpreting that as well is that it could also be referring to the path of living a life. The path of the truth, the path of living a righteous life. Allah Ta'ala has already mentioned to us the right and the wrong. And then on top of that, Allah Ta'ala has guided us so we know what is good and bad. We have an internal monitor or indicator that tells us when something is wrong, so we know that we want to stay away from that. Then Allah Ta'ala has provided us with so many blessings. Now, and if you think about it from a different perspective, what if we weren't created as human beings, but we were created like wild animals who have to go and hunt, and then not only hunt, but then they get their prey, kill it, eat it, and then also have to find somewhere to rest and stay away from other predators, etc. For human beings, we practically get all of our blessings kind of at a click of a button, or an instant. And we even have dwelling houses where we can stay, rest in sort of peace and security. So Allah Ta'ala has made kind of our lives very easy for us. But then on top of that, if you think about it from another perspective, you've got many people out there who are trying to find deen, trying to find some sort of peace in their heart, and yet they're struggling so much, going from one deen to another deen, trying to find somewhere that their heart is going to find peace. And yet for us, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as Muslims has given us Iman for the majority of us, without even us having to make any effort for it. And then in the next verse, 21, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions, later he made him die and then put him into the grave. So up until these last few verses, then these are essentially explaining the cycle of life, right? You're born from a fluid, and then that fluid, once you're created from that fluid, then path is made easy for you to come out of the womb of your mother, and then eventually he's going to die, and then he'll be buried. So this essentially, in a nutshell, is a cycle of life. And then Allah Ta'ala mentions in the next verse, thereafter, when he will intend, Allah, he will raise him up. This is referring to the resurrection. So once he dies, then Allah Ta'ala at some point, he will then be resurrected and stand before Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala. So how can man be so ungrateful when this is his reality? That, Allah Ta'ala is in control of everything, yet this individual then decides to reject everything that's told to him to kind of guide him. Then Allah Ta'ala mentions, no, he has not yet fulfilled what he, i.e. Allah, had commanded him. And what has Allah Ta'ala ordered man to do? And Allah Ta'ala mentions this in the Quran many times, that Allah Ta'ala has given him everything, yet what does the man do? The one who gives everything, yet we disobey him, we transgress the boundaries, we and some people go to an extreme where they even commit shirk, associate partners to Allah Ta'ala, etc. So this is kind of in a nutshell a sign of our ungratefulness, or a human being's ungratefulness. Then Allah Ta'ala advises man how to treat ungratefulness. So now this is Allah Ta'ala going to remind us of some of his blessings on us. So I'm going to read a few of these verses out in a go, and then we'll just go through an explanation, inshallah. So it says here, so let the man look to his food, how well we poured water, how nicely we split the earth, then we grew in it grain, grapes and greens, and olive and date palms, and gardens full of thick trees, fruits and fodder, as a benefit for you and your cattle. So now here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has mentioned numerous benefits. And reality is, if you think about it, these are all benefits that we literally take for granted. We don't actually stop and ponder about this whole process and just expect that it's there on the shelf and we're going to take it. But reality is, look at the process things have to go through, and all of that is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So have we ever considered the foods that we are eating, how it comes to our table, for example, or our dastarkhan or our mat? If we look at our bread or cereal in the morning, essentially these are made from grains that are grown on a farmland. The farmer plants the seed, covers the seed with the earth, then he pours water on it, and then over a period of time, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sends rain down, sends the sun then heats up the land and then provides nutrients to the plant, etc., and it grows. Essentially when it grows, then it basically becomes a crop. Once the crop is ready, it gets harvested. Once it's harvested, it goes to the factory to be processed. Then it goes into another factory to be actually made into a final product, and then it goes to the supermarket shelf. So that whole process, for the most part, the actual asal, the original material, the actual crop itself, for example, is all grown by Allah Ta'ala. At the end of the day, the farmer can put a seed in and stick some water on it, but other than that, he can't really do anything. He has to let nature take its course, so to speak. So if Allah Ta'ala wants it to happen, it will happen. If it doesn't, it doesn't. So it's all a blessing from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the whole food cycle, if you like. So you can see here that everything is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and Allah Ta'ala is essentially reminding us of this ni'mat. And then on top of that, you'll notice that Allah Ta'ala mentioned olives separately. And Allah Ta'ala mentions this because it has more superior benefits. So things like oil is taken out of olives. Then you've got date palms also mentioned separately. And this again is because it's eaten as a whole food and has so much benefit. Like in the month of Ramadan, for example, oftentimes we open our fast with dates because of the nutritious benefit that we get, amongst other things. And then the same water that's actually used on the same ground, Allah Ta'ala brings out many different things, right? So you have one patch of land, how many different crops and vegetation come out of it? You've got gardens, you've got fruit trees, and then on top of that, you've got fodder for the animals. So, you've got sheep. I mean, when you drive in the UK, for example, along the motorway, and you look at the vast fields that are around, oftentimes you'll see that there's sheep on there grazing, you'll see cows grazing, horses, etc. All of these are what? They're all consuming grass that Allah Ta'ala has provided to them. So in other words, the bottom line message here that Allah Ta'ala is trying to give us is that, look, if you look at all of these blessings, how can you be ungrateful? Look at all the benefit you're getting from all of this. Allah Ta'ala mentions in the Quran that it's benefit for you and your animals in this ayat. So here you can see that, it's not just us that are taking benefit, it's also the animals. And in our day and age, we don't necessarily use the animals for traveling, etc. and all that, like they did in the old days. But we still eat, like, cows are also sacrificed. We take the milk from the cows, and then they're also sacrificed for food purposes, as well as, sheep and goats, etc. These are all blessings from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But then, reality is that how many of us do actually take heed of that and actually reflect and see the benefits that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us, and then actually do shukr for that. And that's the ultimate kind of recompense that a person can give. Is that the least that we can do is to say, Ya Allah, thank you, Ya Allah, for all these blessings that you've given us, many of which that we didn't have to make any effort for, really. It's not that difficult to go to the supermarket, pick up some items and put them on a checkout and pay for them, as compared to actually having to grow them and look after the crops, etc. So inshallah ta'ala we'll pause it here, and then inshallah we'll pick up from the next section of this surah tomorrow, which is on a different subject. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept our gathering here to learn about the ayat of the Quran, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us to really maximize our time in this blessed month of Ramadan. Already, subhanallah, the first 10 days have gone by so quickly, and I really pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes the remaining days of Ramadan much better than the days that have already elapsed. Requesting a mention in your du'as, and inshallah ta'ala we'll speak tomorrow. Wa akhiru da'wana.